Hey everybody, welcome back to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. This is Rapid Reactions brought to you by Byers Auto. I am Austin Ward, Jeremy Birmingham, Tim May, Spencer Holbrook. We're back, and after about a month without media access, press conferences with the Buckeyes, got that again today. Ryan Day introducing 4 new assistants, and it was easy to be impressed with Tim Walton, Perry Aliano, Justin Fry, and Jim Knowles, the headliner maybe of that bunch, certainly the highest paid and with the greatest expectations. But you guys can dive into your takeaways, but I thought that all 4 of those guys were pretty impressive, and I had already said going into it, like, these first media availabilities, it's not going to define their tenure, but a lot of times you get a hint, a Ryan Day, a Jeff Hafley of what could come with those guys, and I thought they all sort of aced that test.
Well, I think you start with the fact we haven't heard from anyone here in a month, but clearly they've been working. They've been on the road. Ryan Day obviously restructuring his staff, and he was asked about it in his press conferences. You've had to do this before on defense, and it does seem like he's doing a little bit different. And I think the idea that you have all 4 of those guys today, and we talked about it on Lettermen Live already on Monday, just 4 very different guys, but they're all seemingly pretty well aligned. I thought, Justin Fry, we've heard about him over the years and his ties with Ryan Day and with Chip Kelly and that sort of lineage, and he's just a very impressive guy to talk to, really seems to get it. And I think that sometimes, just being a Midwest guy at Ohio State, it kind of has a different vibe, and I kind of got that with Justin Fry. He seemed to really feel like comfortable, and that's a big first step for me.
Yeah, and Justin Fry was the most impressive of the bunch when it comes to my mind, because I asked him, are there going to be too many cooks in this offensive kitchen? There's a run game coordinator, a pass game coordinator, an offensive coordinator, a head coach, and an offensive line coach.
An associate head coach.
I mean, a quarterback's coach.
If you have a title to give, there's one in the Ohio State offensive coaching staff room. But he said no, because we're just a bunch of guys coaching ball. And you get that sense of confidence of, we all know what we're doing. We're going to do it together, and we're going to do it really well. And, the defensive staff is going to grab all the headlines because of the changes that need to happen there. There wasn't really a need to make a change on the offensive side, but when you have even one little phase that's lagging a little bit, you've got to get it to that championship pedigree. And I think Justin Fry, it's one interview, it's one time talking to him, but he seems up for the task of getting them to the level where the run game is going to be on par with the passing game, just by the way that he carries his business, and he goes about the way he does things.
Yeah, it's interesting to me is that we talked about that on my podcast about Ryan Day tweaking not just the defensive staff but the offensive staff. Just that one little thing that's going to maybe make them even better. Like when I asked Justin Fry, if you look at this from 30,000 feet, they led the nation in total offense and scoring. What needs to be fixed? And he didn't get specific on anything, but basically, that's what Ryan Day is all about. But Jim Knowles, without a doubt, he lived up to the billing as far as like being this thinker, this sharp guy. I don't know how to put it. He doesn't really beat around the bush, about things, and he doesn't really just take a conversation and just extend it. But he's very matter of fact in almost everything he says, which I found very interesting. And Tim Walton, I asked him, the new defensive back, one of the defensive backs coaches, what stood out about your first impression with him, and he goes, just his intelligence. You can tell from your first conversation with him, this guy has an intelligence level that may be a little bit of a notch above. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. But to me, as far as first impressions go, I thought Jim Knowles knocked it out of the park.
And all 4 of them were pretty steadfast that they weren't going to get into the depth chart, the roster numbers, positions. If Justin Fry, tackles and guards, that conversation is going to wait till March. And this was a day of talking about clean slates and waiting, and that today was the first time in here that this entire staff got into the Woody, to go really look at the roster. And they've had 2 weeks where they've been on the road, and they just have not had full staff meetings where, like, this is the group that's going to lead the 2022 Buckeyes. So that part, the journey, it really starts now for that coaching staff. Even though recruiting is a huge part of the job, and they had 2 weeks of that, they weren't doing a lot of that for Wednesday's signing day. They were starting to work ahead for 2023. So you can tell that, maybe a little bit of a chance to exhale, regroup for Ryan Day. Obviously, he was making a ton of calls and working hard to put together this group, but they haven't done a ton of work to just like say, all right, well, spring ball is 7 weeks away now. That's going to wait for another day.
And I think it's actually probably this weekend may validate some of these guys' decision to come coach with Ryan Day, because every other major program in the country this weekend had major junior days on campus and bringing in 40, 50 players. And Ryan Day and his staff had the weekend off. And they're like, hey, you know what? Let's not go crazy. There's no value in bringing in a bunch of kids to Columbus at this time of year. Let's enjoy this time with our families. We'll let these new coaches get into town, get settled, find out where they're going to live, and that's the kind of stuff where I think if you do talk to these other coaches, these new coaches, about their first impressions of Ryan Day, because that's equally as important as Ryan Day's first impression of them. I mean, you have to like who you work with and work for and respect them. And Ryan Day always gets really high grades from his peers about just his ability as a person to really relate to them. And I thought, listening to Justin Fry talk about his 4 kids and how they're still back in California and he doesn't even, he's not even getting to live with them right now. I think it's just one of these moments where you go, wow, these coaches really do live a very different life. A month ago, all 4 of these guys lived totally different places and they wake up one day and all of a sudden they're recruiting for a totally different school. And I just think it's a fascinating dynamic to see how people have to change that quick as far as what they're doing.
One of the most impressive things about the day was Perry Eliano spending 30 minutes on the indoor practice facility, just talking to reporters and building those relationships already. And
being on video.
After being on video for 30 minutes, he stayed.
After I told him that he was going to get ambushed by everybody else and he needed to escape.
Yeah, he didn't use the escape hatch though. He could have just said, "Guys, I got to go to a meeting" or anything. But instead, he decided.
Hey, it's early.
Yeah, he'll learn.
he decided to chat with everybody, and that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people. But I asked him. I said, why? And he said, because it's about building relationships, not just with players, but I want to get to know you guys too. And I've heard that from people who covered him in Cincinnati that he was about that, and he backed it up today. And not every coach is willing to do that. And he's got to be personable with everybody. He doesn't really have to be personable with us. He just has to answer our questions. But he chose to, and that shows you what kind of guy he is, how he's going to try to cultivate these relationships with recruits, and bring them on campus and get to know them and convince them to come to Ohio State. He's a really personable guy, and just from a human side of things, that's what you like to see in a coaching staff that's going to have to convince 17 and 18-year-old kids to join this program.
Yeah, it's funny. I walked up to him and I said, I introduced myself. I said, by the way, you and I are probably the only 2 guys in this room right here, this big Woody Hayes Athletic Center, who hung out in Lufkin for a while because he went to school in Nacogdoches, Texas. We're up the road from Lufkin, went to Stephen F. Austin State University. It says on his bio he's from Killeen, Texas, but he was born in Brooklyn, New York. Obviously, when I saw Killeen on the bio, I went, this is definitely a military kid, and his parents were in the military. And
he said he played college football with Jackson Smith and Jigba's dad.
Probably did at Stephen F. Austin.
He did say
that.
Yeah.
So, it's just an interesting staff. And of course, Tim Walton, I covered him as a player here from 89 to 93. And I asked him, had you tried to get back here before? Because of course he's been in the NFL for the last
15
decade
years,
or whatever. Yeah. And he said, kind of like hinted that maybe he did try to get back here at one point or another, but things weren't really right at that point. But when Ryan Day called him, sometimes things are they come together. He's on a staff down there at Jacksonville. Let's face it, this was not been the best last couple of years at Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And I think he was looking for a little bit of a fresh start, and he's getting a fresh start. And as he said, he used to practice in that facility there he's standing in, the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. And
it's a little different than it was in 1993.
Well, no, the indoor field is, except it's not AstroTurf now. It's whatever the turf they got in there. But it's still pretty much the same. But you're right. The rest of this, I asked him, basically they didn't have a water wall back then, and he laughed, But yeah, it's just, to me, it's an interesting collection of guys because they've all been around, and Jim Knowles has been a head coach before, so he understands what's expected from his position as a defensive coordinator and an assistant coach, and understands it well. But man, I'm telling you, that guy impresses me because you just know he's thinking, but his thinking is, to put it simply, is to make it simple for the guys on defense to be very multiple, to be very creative on defense in a simple kind of way. And I'm very interested to see where this goes.
Well, and that's the important part, Tim, is that we can't make any definitive evaluations about how much success they will or won't have with this team. But, I think the way they handled today and the question that I had, what were we going to learn and what were we going to take out of it? Do you understand the pressure? Jim Knowles hasn't dealt with that at Duke, didn't deal with that at Oklahoma State. Obviously, he is a high achiever, and Perry Eliano and Tim Walton were saying the same things, that yes, the pressure is a privilege and they can throw out cliches, but to walk into the room, to be tasked with The national championship is what you are supposed to provide, and that's the goal here. That's the standard. And the defense is what is viewed as what kept Ohio State from reaching that.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of burden. Now, they're going to be well compensated, and they were brought in for a reason to do that. We'll see how it plays out, but none of the three blinked about that and didn't hide from the fact that they know that's why that they're here.
Yeah. Do you remember when I asked him, I said, do you see this as more of an opportunity or pressure, because like you pointed out, and you followed up on it too, at Oklahoma State, he had 3 or 4 years to get it right.
Yeah.
Because they had never been very good on defense.
And he said, I know I won't have 4 years.
Yes,
to do it.
exactly. And he doesn't. And to me, he gets it, and but like you and I talked about on my podcast, there's a little bit, you got a feeling there's more raw material here for him to work with, and guys who have gotten experience the hard way over the last, especially this last season. I'm telling you, it's going to be interesting to watch that.
Well, Ryan Day said it earlier in his press conference, like, he understands he has to win every game.
Yeah.
Like, there is not.
Wasn't that amazing? I mean,
but he means it.
I know.
And that's become the expectation, and that is the truth at Ohio State. Every single time Ohio State loses, the world ends for people. And so, like, the goal, 10 years ago, it was beat Michigan, get to the Rose Bowl. And now it's win every single game, never lose ever again.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the national championship trophy from 2014 right now, and Ryan Day lost that trophy game a year ago and didn't have to make a single change. He lost one time in Ann Arbor and had to completely overhaul his entire defensive staff. The guys we talked to today are here because Ohio State lost in Michigan. To boil it down to something really simple, I mean, it's a lot more than that, but that's the pressure that these guys now step into, and I think that personifies it more than we can even put it into terms. That game determines so much, and so to get back to winning that trophy, you had to elevate this defense. And Jim Knowles, like you said, didn't quite do it at Oklahoma State when it comes to working under this kind of pressure. It just gets turned up as every day passes. Before you get to that Notre Dame game, September 3rd, the pressure continues to mount, and these guys, they're going to continue to feel it. And I think the first press conference is all about grateful for the opportunity. The pressure comes the first week of March when the pads come on, you start hitting each other in practice.
And all 4 of those guys, and you makes a good point, all 4 of those guys are coming from places where, boy, you get to 8 or 9 wins. Cincinnati, grabbed the brass ring this year. But you get to 8 or 9 or 10 wins, you've had a damn good year. Tim Walton at Jacksonville, are you kidding me?
6 wins.
Yeah. I mean, the pressure here is every week, every day is trying to win every game. And I'm just wondering when it's going to really hit them, because even when Tim Walton was here as a player, it wasn't like that then. Late 80s, early 90s. And that it's really, like I said, just going to be interesting.
Well, a lot of firsts for them. First time talking with the media, first full staff meeting with Ryan Day. They saw some of the guys working out with Mickey Marotti as the winter program gets ramped up, and we're ramping up our coverage for the 2022 Ohio State Buckeyes as well. First rapid reaction from Byers Auto as we shift gears into this next season. That's Spencer Holbrook, Tim May, Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. You can get all of our coverage all year round at lettermenrow.com.